general, I have found that if a department will be supportive of you emotionally, they will also support you financially. And if they are going to just treat you as a cog in the machine, that will also show up in the money. So it's okay to advocate for yourself to receive that.
Welcome to the Personal Finance for PhDs podcast, a higher education in personal finance. This podcast is for PhDs and PhDs-to-be who want to explore the hidden curriculum of finances to learn the best practices for money management, career advancement, and advocacy for yourself and others. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Roberts, a financial educator specializing in early career PhDs and founder of Personal Finance for PhDs. This is Season 22, Episode 6, and today my guest is Dr. Hannah Percival, an instructor at Houston City College who holds a PhD in music theory. Hannah shares how she financially made it through graduate school on a small stipend, including how she minimized student loan debt, side hustled, and kept her expenses low. She also tells the stories of landing her first and, more importantly, second post-PhD jobs, and gives great advice for job seekers. If you want to bring one of my live tax workshops to your university next tax season, get in touch with me ASAP. Between now and the end of the year, I'm populating my calendar, especially early February, with in-person and remote speaking engagements. My workshops are typically hosted by graduate schools, postdoc offices, and graduate student associations, and sometimes individual departments. Whether you are in a position to make those arrangements or simply want to recommend me, you can get the ball rolling by emailing me at emily@pfforphds.com. My tax workshops, both live and pre-recorded, are my most popular offering each year because taxes are such a widespread pain point for graduate students, postdocs, and postbacs. You can find the show notes for this episode at pfforphds.com/S22E6. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Hannah Percival. I am delighted to have joining me on the podcast today Dr. Hannah Percival, who is a full-time music professor and the program director for music at Houston City College. And we are going to be talking all about making grad school work on a tiny budget. So Hannah, I know we're going to get a lot of insight out of this interview. Thank you so much for volunteering to come on. And will you please introduce yourself a little bit further for our audience?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Hannah Percival, and I received my doctorate in fine arts in music theory. And I also have a graduate certificate in piano pedagogy from Texas Tech University.
And what have you done since then? Give us a preview.
So now I'm the program coordinator at Houston City College, and I'm a full-time instructor at Houston Community College. And currently, this is my dream job. I love the students that I get to work with. And I feel like a lot of the choices I made in grad school have prepared me super well for this position.
Okay, let's see if we can circle back to that a little bit later. When you approached me about giving this interview, you said that it was really important to you that you minimize the amount of student debt you need to take out during your PhD. So can you tell us more about what's like normal in your program and why that approach was important to you?
Yeah, definitely. So I had a lot of emotional support and encouragement from my family, but I didn't have any financial support. And so through my undergraduate degrees, minimizing debt was also important. I commuted an hour and a half each way. Well, I went to community college first, which is one reason I have such a big passion for working at community colleges. But then I commuted an hour and a half each way in order to keep working at my piano studio I had at my parents' house for my bachelor's degree. So I came out of the bachelor's degree, I think that was debt-free. There may have been I think I took a small temporary loan for I went on a study abroad to France for a summer and then paid that off. And so then I had a similar mindset with my master's degree, where my master's degree is in a different field. It's in counseling, and I did the research track because I felt like it would really inform my teaching. And so that was also scholarship based because as my salary as a worship leader was paid as a scholarship for this school. So minimizing debt was already really important to me. And then when I was reading up about what grad school is like, I saw how I was very aware of how few jobs there were. And so even though I knew I really wanted to go to get a PhD and have that experience, I wanted to make sure that I did it in a way that wasn't going to overly burden me in the future if I didn't get an academic job. Um, and I think, although I probably couldn't have articulated this at that time, I think stability is really important to me. Even though I chose a career that's in fine arts and in education and higher ed, stability is really important to me. And I think a large reason that became even more true for me during my PhD was because I had a lot of mental health and physical health issues. And I realized that those can be expensive in America. And so I wanted to make sure that I was setting myself up for success even with those extenuating circumstances.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm so glad that you're obviously very intentional throughout your entire, academic journey there. I'm wondering if in your field, is it typical for people to take out student loan debt? And even in the program that you attended, was it typical for your classmates to be taking out debt?
I would say it ranges a little bit. I know that when I was looking at my career options and loans in general, my parents suggested that I sort of think about what would be a range of salary for the career I would do, and to take out no less to not take out more than a year's salary just as a benchmark. And I think a lot of musicians know that the fields are not very well paying. They used to always tell us don't go into music for the money. But I also think that musicians tend to feel very dedicated and driven towards having a successful career. And so sometimes we tend to get tied up in the prestige of needing to go to a very big university or study with a specific professor or have a specific level of instrument. And so that can also influence what you're paying for as a musician. And I think music is an interesting cross section, especially in America, where it can be a tool for people like me that felt like music was the best way to improve their life career goals. And also, it's often a very privileged subset of people that are able to have those private lessons. Um, so I always hear the horror stories of people that, went like $100,000 in debt for a bassoon career and then didn't get it into the symphony. And of course, those are the horror stories, but those are still real people that made difficult choices and didn't receive the payment out that they had invested into it. So I would say there's both definitely people who were more conservative about it, and those were the people I gravitated towards in grad school. But there's also definitely the pressure to don't worry about money. You need to worry about making the best art that you can.
It's so interesting that we're having this conversation right now because, okay, we're recording this in September 2025. And, the advice that your parents gave you, don't let your student loan debt exceed more than 1 year of your expected salary. Pretty standard. It makes a lot of sense. It's been given for a long time. Now we're looking at, with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, these overall lifetime federal student loan limits of $100,000 for most people and then $200,000 for certain high paid, career track graduate degrees. And so I'm imagining your track is more on that 100K side of things. And even your example just now was that would be a lot to take out for a type of career where you didn't make it to the upper echelon of, what the possibilities were. So I think this is a subject that's on a lot of people's minds at the moment, and how this new, the new rules from the federal government are going to impact borrowing for graduate degrees. Is it going to bring down the cost of programs, or is it going to push more people to the private loan market, or a combination of the two? So anyway, no answers there just yet, but it makes total sense to me why your approach to this was the way it was. And so I guess I'll ask, did you end your PhD with no student loan debt or, 1 year's expected salary? Or like, how did you actually finish up with respect to the student loans?
I was looking it up right before this podcast, and I couldn't find the exact number, but I know it was no more than 13,000, and I paid that off as I went. I didn't accrue that until the very end of my degree, um, so that was right when the pandemic hit, and I had health issues at the same time. So I took out the loans for that, um, and also something that I think is important is that when you receive a TA ship, you really need to look at all of the details of it, and you need to know it super well and not rely on the institution or the professors to remind you of those things. And so I was aware of some of the things, like I wouldn't get paid until October, so that like moving costs would be expensive, or not paid out until later. And I was aware of a lot of those things, but there was also in the fine print of if your degree goes more than 4 years, the TA ship does not last more than 4 years. But nobody mentioned anything to me about that. So I was already proactive about that and had been asking around. And my advisor realized, oh, yeah, that's a problem, and was able to find funds to keep me on as a lab assistant for our research lab. But that was tricky and could have been a lot worse if I hadn't been more proactive about that.
Wonderful advice. Oh my gosh. I know there are people in the audience who really need to hear that just now. And even what you said about, I ended up accruing, most of that debt, it sounds like in 1 year because there was a confluence of fact. Okay, pandemic, nobody expected that. And then also personal stuff coming up at the same time. And that's actually just like on the point that I was just making about these federal loan limits. Like, it makes a lot of sense to have your plan, your like plan A for how you're going to fund graduate school, not to be maxing out all of the loans and for everything to be going perfectly with your TA ship or whatever it is to last the entire time. Because like in the course of a PhD, it's a long period of time and some curveballs are going to be thrown your way. And so you need to have a little bit of room to pivot. So like you had given yourself that room by like not taking out student loan debt or taking it out and repaying it, gradually earlier in your degree so that by the time you finished, even though you had this final curveball, the overall total was really quite minimal.
Yes, and I received a generous fellowship where it was a TA ship as well as a scholarship. So it paid all of my tuition and then fees, and then I had some for living expenses. So I was able to use that for the first 4 years. But already I think by year 3 or 4, I had started taking on some extra side gigs. And then that was really helpful to utilize those when my funding became less steady. And I think that one reason, I think it took me 6 or 7 years to finish, but part of that was because I was working, and also I chose to get an extra graduate certificate because I felt like that would really help my job chances both in academia and just in the professional music world, and it really did. So even though I ended up taking out some at the end, I had that flexibility because I hadn't been using them that whole time. And it was one of the direct unsubsidized loans. And so that was very helpful because during the pandemic, all of the interest was paused. So I was able to pay that off within 6 months, I think, a year or 6 months. So that was very nice.
Well, you just brought up increasing your income. And so I want to hear more about how you did that because you described like the funding package that you received, but then also you were doing other kinds of side work. So let's talk about that. But as we're doing it, I would love for you to share also, because you just said it took 6 or 7 years to finish postmasters. And I'm wondering if any of that, extended timeline on the PhD was because you were working and what really the interplay is there between like, okay, I need more money to live, but I also need to get to graduation. So like, let's talk about both those things.
Yes, definitely. I think so. First of all, I think one of the best things I did was I was very strategic in choosing my graduate degree program. I saw that the funding packages for PhDs were much larger than those for master's degrees, which makes sense. And my bachelor's degree was in music theory, and it had prepared me exceptionally well to go straight into a PhD in music theory. But on paper, I had a master's degree in a very different field. So a lot of schools were not open to that, but some were very open to that. And so I had four schools that I was extremely interested in that were fine with PhD students who had a bachelor's degree in music but not a master's. And they were specifically also focusing on music cognition, which was a way for me to use the psychology counseling alongside with my music theory. And actually, I think it was my eventual advisor who helped me phrase it this way in an email of like, I think I was phrasing it as a liability. And he was like, no, this is great because you have a different perspective, and that can make you really unique and valuable. So I had two offers. I really appreciate the fact that I invested in myself and in my future enough to pay out of pocket to go and visit both campuses. It led to some really candid conversations with students and faculty at both of the institutions. And one of them, the institution I didn't go to, did not end up offering me that much money, but also they told me that they would try to get me in front of a classroom once before I graduated. Whereas Texas Tech said that I would be an instructor on record for one or two classes every semester. And I felt like that would make such a huge difference in my resume. And it did, actually, on the job market quite a bit. And so that was really important to me. So the first thing I would do is if you have a unique situation like I do or did, where you're wanting to go into a PhD in a field that's not directly after a master's in your field, I would encourage you to still look at doing a PhD because any courses that you need to make up are usually going to be part of that PhD program anyway. Depends on each institution, of course, but at mine it was very similar, just that the dissertation took longer at the PhD level. I would say that my degree progress was uh, faster than a lot of my contemporaries. Now that I'm thinking about it, it was, let's see, I started in 2015 and then graduated in 2021. So, yeah, 6 years. But a lot of that last year and a half was because of the pandemic. My research is researching how people bond together socially over music, and that hit right as COVID hit. So my research got really changed.
I love taking it back to that selection process for graduate school, and that, yes, you included the financial components in the decision, but also your career progression based on your career goals. It wasn't, you mentioned earlier about like program prestige, for example. That's important. That's a factor, but there are other very important things as well. And so I'm really glad that you brought up those other points about like, well, is this program actually going to get me what I want in terms of the job that I want to have after this? Like, it's easy to forget that when you have all these other things that are maybe more like in your face about who do I want to work with or like these kinds of things. So I'm really glad you brought us back there. So you were funded for, to some degree throughout, it sounds like. But then when did you bring in like outside work, and how much of an impact, I guess, did that make on your ability to live comfortably as a graduate student?
Yeah, so I think it was about year two. Yeah, I think it was about year two I started doing some extra gigs. And I've always had multiple jobs my whole life. I think that's just part of being a musician. So that was always sort of my plan. The two that really were the biggest income generators and also the best for my resume were that I worked at the Graduate Writing Center. So I got to help students at any graduate program at our college work on job documents and work on their projects. And it was very interesting because I get to talk to all these people from different fields. And I also got the opportunity to practice teaching writing, which I feel like is a really important skill within music research that's not often taught. And then I was a teaching artist for the Lubbock Symphony Orchestra. So I would go into classrooms in public schools and teach music for second graders about their science curriculum or about their political science curriculum. So that was very fun. Both of those were very fluid as far as I could schedule them when I needed to around my classes and my TA-ship. That was very helpful and would have been very difficult to do a different type of work that wasn't more flexible. I also did tutoring, accompanying piano lessons. Those were sort of like the black market, or like kind of just did it without on my own gig work. And then during the off times, sort of an inverse, where Lubbock is very isolated. And so at Christmas time, if I stayed in Lubbock, I could make a lot of money as a pet sitter and doing gigs by playing music at Christmas. But for the first 2 years in the summer, all of the college students tend to leave, and so my little bubble really would collapse economically. And so I actually went back home to live with my parents for 2 summers so I could work at a local bookstore and then actually pay for my rent during those months. After a few years, then I was able to do some more of the working at the writing center during the summer and working with Lubbock Symphony during the summer. But my first 2 years, I actually went back home first.
I love all these ideas, all these creative ideas. And some of them, of course, are unique to you and the skills that you were developing, during graduate school. And some of them are things that probably other people could do as well. I like that you had that observation about the town emptying out at certain times of year and how that affected you. And certainly if you live in a college town, then you have to take into account those cycles. So interesting. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add about increasing income or actually, I do have one more follow-up question. You mentioned the writing center job and that it was, you could schedule it around your, the volume of work that you had going on elsewhere. That's really cool because I would have thought that a writing center job would be sort of like an assistantship, like a regular certain number of hours per week. So can you explain to me how that job was different than like your TA type position?
It was a certain number of hours per week, but because we were working with graduate students, a lot of graduate students preferred evening hours. And so I was able to schedule most of my writing sessions or client sessions in the evenings. And I think for a while we may have even done Saturdays online. I can't remember, but I remember that they weren't just during the 9 to 5. So that was very helpful.
I see. And I love jobs I'm using the word job a little bit loosely, but work that graduate students can pursue that they can schedule around what works for them, because your primary focus is getting through that dissertation and doing the research that you need to do. And so, yeah, there are certain times when your source of income is going to have to take, a back seat, and you still want it to be there for you when you're ready to, have a different schedule, put more hours into it. So that's very, very helpful when you can find that kind of work.
And I found it actually very motivating for finishing my degree because everyone was working with graduate students who were trying to work through their own dissertations. And about 50% of the staff were current graduate students. And so it was also encouraging to be in a group of people who were currently writing and going through that process. While there were a lot of people doing things like musicology or music performance, there weren't that many people who were doing a music PhD when I was. And so I sort of had to build my own little cohort, and doing the writing center really helped. And it was also nice to do it in a group that's not your own field. Sometimes it's nice to connect with graduate students that are not just with your same professor and same classes, but still have similar experiences that they're going through.
Absolutely. This is an important part of side work that often goes overlooked, which is the networking. It can, in your case, it helped you find people who can motivate you to get to your finish line in terms of your PhD, or, there's other purposes in other settings, of course. Anything else you wanted to add about the income side of the equation?
I encourage people to apply for small scholarships that seem really relevant to what they need for the same reasons you just mentioned. It's free money, which is awesome. And you also build those networks that are super helpful for, in that moment, getting to know people that are interested in your field. And also, it adds to your resume. It's another thing you can put on it that helps you gain more scholarships. So I know some people in the past I had an advisor in undergrad encourage me not to apply for small scholarships because it wasn't worth the time, but I have found them very helpful.
I'm so glad that you added that. Yeah. I mean, applying for scholarships too is I'm really surprised that your undergrad advisor said that, because I feel like the attitude generally is you're going to be preparing a lot of materials for a lot of different purposes anyway. And so yes, of course you have to tailor and you have to be selective, but I don't know that the time burden is that much, and winning it really can help you not only monetarily, but also in all these other factors that we were just talking about. So Yeah. I'm glad
Yeah.
you kind of moved on past that advice and said, okay, I'm going to go in a different direction.
I think that it's also really important when you're in the bubble of grad school to be thinking about multiple different careers you could use post graduate school. And part of that is looking to see where will my skills be most used. So, also what you love and also what you're good at. But I think sometimes in music, we often prioritize what we love or what we want to do. But I think there's a lot of benefit in also seeing what will be the most required of me in a field. So I realized that all bachelor's degrees in the US tend to require 4 semesters of music theory, 4 semesters of sight singing and ear training, and 4 semesters of class piano. And so I felt like focusing on those were really great job security. And so I pursued the extra certificate, and I have found that to be extremely helpful because those are sort of the like bread and butter of the degree plans. And then if you have extras that you can add on, that's great. But being able to fill in where it's most there's a significant need for those courses can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what we were talking about earlier about like, oh, plan A, like plan A might not work out. And it's helpful to have some skills that are going to apply so you have a plan B and a plan C and so forth. Very, very smart. Emily here for a brief interlude. I'm hard at work behind the scenes updating my suite of tax return preparation workshops for tax year 2025. These educational workshops explain how to identify, calculate, and report your higher education-related income and expenses on your federal tax return. For the 2025 tax season, starting in January 2026, I'm offering live and pre-recorded workshops for U.S. citizen resident graduate students, postdocs, and postbacks, and non-resident graduate students and postdocs. Would you please reach out to your graduate school, graduate student government, postdoc office, international house, fellowship coordinator, etc., to request that they host one or more of these workshops for you and your peers? I'd love to receive a warm introduction to a potential sponsor this fall so we can hit the ground running in January serving those early bird filers. You can find more information about hosting these workshops at pfforphds.com/tax-workshops. Please pass that page on to the potential sponsor. Now back to our interview. Let's talk about the expenses side of the equation, the other half of like making it work financially as a graduate student. So were there any like either really valuable or like really creative things that you did to keep a lid on your expenses during graduate school?
Yes, I was also lucky in that Lubbock is a very low cost of living area. And I know that that's not always true. That's definitely something I also took into account before moving. But one thing I did, it took a lot of searching, but I found a really cute duplex, or more like a quadruplex, but little apartment that was within walking distance. It was a long walking distance, but walking distance. So because I didn't have a car for the first 3 years, which is another reason why I didn't really have any side jobs until year 2 or 3. So I couldn't really leave anywhere that wasn't campus. So that really kind of limited things, and I thought it would limit my social life, but I'm also kind of introverted anyway, and I found people that were willing to like pick me up to go to a board game night and things. So I didn't find it to be a huge sacrifice unless it was a windstorm. Then that was rough.
Okay, so is the sort of frugal tactic there the place where you lived, or is it the living in such a place that you didn't need to own a car?
I think a combination. So if I had lived in a town that had really good public transportation, then that would also save me a lot of money. Lubbock is not known for being a walking town. So I was lucky in that I was able to find a place close to campus that was reasonably priced. So I think it was a combination of realizing that Lubbock did not have good public transportation and I wasn't going to have a car. So making sure that some of like the money that I would have paid for a car went more towards the rent. So I think that my rent was $750 a month, which was really nice.
And you said something like it was a difficult search process. Like, can you give us any tips, what you think might be applicable for other graduate students? Because I've heard this kind of over and over on the podcast is like, I really had to put in the legwork, but I found a deal.
Yes, my mom and I drove down to Lubbock and we talked with a realtor. Well, actually, we talked with 2 or 3 realtors. And we went and looked at several different properties that were all within walking distance of the college. And 2 of the realtors we talked with, it just wasn't a good fit, and the location. One place we looked at, the ceiling, like I would not have been able to stand up in the apartment for my entire college degree. Um, and so we were supposed to go back home, but we still hadn't found a place to live. So we ended up staying an extra day and continuing to look at other properties, and we finally found one that was nice. And but it took a lot of searching. So I think knowing what your um, most important things are, which mine was walking distance to school, I was good. And I ended up spending a little more than I wanted, but it was, oh, and I wanted it to be safe. So, but then that also meant I had to compromise on other things, like the laundromat was in the laundry was in the garage. And I don't think there was no central heating and things like that. So,
I see. Well, can I ask then about, it sounds like at some point you acquired a car and what the sort of trade-off was there, because you also mentioned, well, that enabled me to do different kinds of work.
yeah. So, again, lucky. I was lucky in that through an inheritance, my parents were able to buy me a used car. And so the car helped me go and do more gigs. And so that was really nice because it was able, I didn't have to pay for the car payment. So that was a big blessing. And it helped me to be able to go do more gigs throughout Lubbock.
But you have to pay for insurance, you have to pay for
It's
gas,
true.
you have to pay for
Yeah.
registration. So like there are,
Yeah.
aside from just
Definitely.
the cost of the car itself, there's other like
Yes.
expenses. But it sounds like
Yes.
it was worthwhile, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it was for me.
All right. What other frugal tactics did you use?
I tried to use as many of the campus resources as possible. So we had a food bank, and I was able to use counseling services there. And at one point, I used medical services on campus, and then I realized that our student health insurance, I mean, the insurance that I got through being a TA was good enough that I could go outside of campus and receive a little bit cheaper and better care. Um, but always looked for all of the free food options and go to all of the different talks that had free food.
Can I ask about the food bank
Yes.
usage?
Yeah.
Because I know some students have certain feelings about accessing basic needs like that, but like, how did you think about that?
I ended up not using it as much as I could have because I don't know why, honestly. I think I had this idea of well, I'm good enough. Somebody else can use it.
So
But if
you had certain
everybody
feelings
feels
about
that
it
way
too.
too,
Yeah.
yeah. But if everybody feels that way, but I know it was just really helpful for my mental health to know that it was there if I needed it.
This is actually something that came up in an interview that I've not published yet, but that will be coming out before this current interview is coming out. And that's about actually looking, we were talking earlier about the selection of graduate school, taking into account the student services that are provided at the different options that you have, in particular basic needs. And we were talking earlier about plan A for your funding during graduate school. Hey, it's really great to know if there are basic need services available on campus, even if you don't plan on using them. Like you said, just knowing it's there as a backup option can be really, really helpful and comforting. And so, if you hit
Yes.
some skids that okay, that's there for me. I'm not going to be food insecure.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. I think my biggest expense was the medical bills. So that was a frustrating thing, but it was really nice that we did have good health insurance through being a TA. Um, yeah, I really wanted a kitty, but I waited because I was like, what if the kitty has health problems and I can't take them to the
Yeah.
vet? And
Yeah.
then that ended up being a good thing. I adopted a kitty during the pandemic. I couldn't wait any longer. But then he ended up having some pretty severe diabetes complications. But by then I had already had a stable job and things. But I'm proud of younger Hannah for not getting a cat then, even though I wanted it, because I think it did end up being much more expensive than I expected.
Yeah, you were prescient in that way, actually. And yeah, I mean, if you're struggling just to provide for yourself, then yeah, you definitely have to think twice about adding anyone to your household in that sense. Was there anything for other people who really want to be pet owners while they're in graduate school, but maybe think the same as you? It's not the right time financially. Like, were there ways that you could get some of the same benefits of having a pet that before you actually could adopt one?
Highly recommend being a pet sitter because you get
Yes.
all of those cuddles and you get paid for it.
Yes. I just put this in the sample chapter for my book that I'm writing, which is like about increasing income and saying how like baby, pet, and house sitting. Hey, like if you get some personal joy out of those like
Yes.
scenarios and you get paid for it, like double benefit.
Yes.
Let's talk then about when you transitioned out of graduate school and were applying for full-time positions. Do you have any other advice for people who are in like a similar stage or leading up to that stage?
Yes. One is more generic that I think people hear a lot, but I think is still important. At the Graduate Writing Center, I learned a lot about helping to really tailor your documents to the job ad and to also for funding if you're applying for a specific type of grant or funding. And I found that extremely useful, not only for um, getting an interview, but also for understanding, is this a job that I want? Is this the type of opportunity that would be good for me? Am I a good match for this? Um, but I will also say that even when you tailor everything and you work really hard on your applications, it's still very confusing. And having now been on some job searches, it's also very confusing. Like the whole process is confusing for the applicants, I think, because you don't get a lot of feedback on what you did wrong or right. Um, and there's a lot of luck involved of like, are you the specific candidate that person needs at that specific time? And they may have needs that they haven't been able to like advertise exactly. So I think being kind to yourself during the job hunt is very important because there's a lot of luck involved, unfortunately. Um, and I applied to hundreds over many years. I got about 10 initial interviews, and I guess I only got one on campus interview. So there weren't very many on campus interviews. But I really felt like it was still important for me to do that process and to continue trying for that. During that time, I was continuing to work at the Graduate Writing Center and I taught piano lessons. But I started rewarding myself with every rejection letter I would get, whether it's for a funding opportunity or a job. I would buy myself office supplies. So I had so many fancy pens for a while.
Yeah. I mean, at least when you were receiving that bad news, you can say, oh, but I get to buy something really pretty for my desk. That's nice.
Exactly.
So it sounds to me like that you finished graduate school, you were doing this sort of part-time work while you were continuing to apply for full-time positions. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And I think your advice is very good, very spot on. But like, is there anything more that you can say about that perseverance? Because that's a lot of applications that you had to submit.
Yes, it was. I want to acknowledge that I did get married during that time, and it was to someone that had savings and had a steady job, and that was really wonderful. It was also really important to me that I have the career that I had worked so long for. So I could have certainly built up my piano studio and taken on more writing clients, but I really wanted to try to be a college professor since I had worked for that for so long. So I got an opportunity to teach at a school, and it was teaching all the things I wanted to. During the interview, it seemed like it was going to be a great fit where I could really help students, and it was in a small environment. So we moved, and thankfully, my husband's job is remote, so he was able to move with me. But I got there, and I had already had some health issues, and I let them know before I came that I was going to need a sub for the first 2 weeks. So before I accepted the job, I let them know, and they were okay with that. But then when I got there, they hadn't gotten any subs for me. And then they were upset that I hadn't been more dedicated to my students, even though I was on bed rest from my surgery. And so it quickly became very toxic. And it got to the point where, after about 8 weeks in that job, I found myself very jealous of people in the grocery store, like workers in the grocery store, because I was like, they're able to do their job and go home and be done. And they don't have to worry about, am I harming this student's future? Am I helping this student take on so much college debt knowing that they're not going to be successful in this program? So I reached out to my PhD advisor, and he was very encouraging, saying that, I was more important than the job title, and that if I ended up leaving and doing my plan B or C or D, that was more important than letting the job and the toxicity of that job wreck my mental health to irreparable spot. So while I was teaching full time at that institution, it was $24,000 a year for full time, which is not enough to survive on. So I was also adjuncting for Houston Community College at the time, online. And everyone I knew who was at that level working had to do 2 jobs at once, whether it was teaching at more than one institution or some other kind of job. And that actually gave me the job that I have now. So it was a really good learning experience to realize that I can be good at this job and I can love it, and I can still be at the wrong spot. So to realize that sometimes you can have your dream job and it's not the right environment, and to be willing to walk away from that is hard. But sometimes it can lead you into more healthy positions. And the position I'm in now, I feel very supported. My colleagues are wonderful. I still get to help support students, and I feel like I am being supported for the long haul. So I just want to encourage people that if your dream job turns out not to be your dream job, that's okay.
I'm taking 2 things from that story, and I'm so glad that it took the turn that it did.
Yes, me too.
The first is that the long, protracted search for the first job did not have to be repeated, right? It was much more ready that you got the second job, even though the first one took so long to land.
Although I did do, I was applying to even more jobs with the full time in order to get out of that position.
That makes sense. But it didn't take the length of time that the first one took. And the second one was that opportunities came from working. So
yes, absolutely.
Just doing anything that's, related. I mean, as related as it can be, of course, to the career that you ultimately want. But like just doing any kind of work in that field is going to be helpful to you in some manner. And I hear this story over and over again of like the part-time work I did, or it led to that full-time job. It happens over and over. It makes sense. People want to hire known quantities, of course. So I just want to point that out as well, as like, keep working, even side work in addition to the full-time job. If the full-time job is not everything that, it cracked up to be, then keep creating opportunities for yourself through working, and of course, continuing to apply as you did. So I find that very encouraging. Anything else you want to share with our audience, advice for getting that first job or the second job post-PhD?
It's okay to want stable income. And I think that that's not always talked about in music. We're told to follow our passion. And I'm lucky in that I did find the job that I wanted all along. And, it's got a really nice bow on the story. But I also know a lot of people that have happier lives outside of academia, that have the space now to do things that they've wanted to do in their artistic field. But in general, I have found that if a department will be supportive of you emotionally, they will also support you financially. And if they are going to just treat you as a cog in the machine, that will also show up in the money. So it's okay to advocate for yourself to receive that. And so when I went over to this full-time position, I ended up making 3 times the amount of money for like half the work. And so I also encourage people to highly consider working at a community college, especially if you have a passion for teaching. It doesn't have the prestige as some other places. In some places, it has a little bit of a stigma because you often are not paid to research. Your research is not the important part, but there's a lot of funding available. And so a lot of the professors that have the most lucrative jobs I know tend to work full-time at community colleges.
I actually have a neighbor where I live who has a PhD and teaches at a local community college. And I believe it has the same kind of tenure system. Obviously, it's not based on the same things that it would be at an R1 institution, but there's still a great deal of job security that can be attained through this route, which, as you said earlier, is one of your high values.
Yes.
Hannah, thank you so much for this interview. It's been very encouraging. And yes, I'm so glad that you volunteered to give it. Would you please share with us your best financial advice for another early career PhD? And it could be something that we've touched on in the interview already, or it could be something completely new.
Yes, I was brainstorming how to phrase this with my husband because it was this big complicated thing. And he said, don't get academia tunnel vision. And I loved that phrasing because in academia, we tend to have these ideas of you do this and then you do this. And if that doesn't work, you just keep trying. And that if you have to move your family to a place they don't want to be, you do it. Or you take the place that has the best prestige. And I have found that it is good and healthy to prioritize your own mental, personal stability and sorry, I messed that up. That it's good to prioritize your own mental health and physical health and stability. You get to choose how you work for academia. And you get to choose if academia is placing you into a position that is untenable, it's okay to do plan B or plan C.
I love the phrasing your husband came up with. I love your phrasing that you had just there. You choose how you work for academia. Like, this is a two-way street ultimately. And we've seen so much with, I mean, it's going on for decades now, but the quit lit, like people make, they think that academia is the be all end all and then realize that it's not. And they end up leaving for, greener pastures and so forth. And just great advice. I want people to go back, listen to that little segment over again because it's so, so true. And we all need to hear it more. So thank you very much. And thank you again for volunteering to give this interview.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate all of your work, Emily. Your work on the tax preparation was so helpful, especially because understanding how taxes work for things that are both stipend but then also a paycheck are very confusing. So I really, really appreciate you. And so does my tax returns.
Okay, thank you so much for saying that. Listeners, thank you for joining me for this episode. I have a gift for you. You know that final question I ask of all my guests regarding their best financial advice? My team has collected short summaries of all the answers ever given on the podcast into a document that is updated with each new episode release. You can gain access to it by registering for my mailing list at pfforphds.com/advice. Would you like to access transcripts or videos of each episode? I link the show notes for each episode from pfforphds.com/podcast. See you in the next episode. And remember, you don't have to have a PhD to succeed with personal finance, but it helps. Nothing you hear on this podcast should be taken as financial, tax, or legal advice for any individual. The music is Stages of Awakening by Poddington Bear from the Free Music Archive and is shared under CC by NC. Podcast editing by me and show notes creation by Dr. Jill Hoffman.